So Representative Lekis, I will caution you that if this is being recorded, everyone who watches YouTube will know your summer vacation spot. So
That's okay.
so anyway, I know your time is precious, and Melissa should be here soon. Why don't we just get started? We've already had one session on this, so this is a study committee subcommittee on interim study for HB 1295 here at 2:00. And that one is the measure requiring reports concerning school policies on classroom recordings and in-classroom observers. We spent a good period of time already. I know Alicia was not here, and I guess Julius wasn't either. But you've had a chance to look at the YouTube, as have others, I could tell by looking at the number of views. So anyway, we've already talked about this quite a lot. So let me just summarize again, and then we can discuss, and then hopefully get a motion of some sort. And then we'll do another one at 3:00. So this is, as we said before, I know I'm repeating myself, most of you all were here before, modeled on the gifted student bill, which is now law. And all this, the intent of this measure is simply to, as was the case with HB 321, the gifted bill, simply solicit reports from districts for DOE to, and I think Attorney Fenton was here for the previous session as well, so I know this is old news to her as well. Simply a requirement to submit reports for, again, a best practices folder on policies regarding classroom recordings and classroom observers. And some of this is related to COVID, when so many schools went remote, went hybrid, and some new questions came up about privacy issues. And this is, we've talked about all this before. So anyway, without repeating all that, again, that's the essence of it, simply asking for reports for best practices folder so that we can compare approaches on classroom observations, whether in person or remote. So this quick summary and comments, thoughts.
Isn't Representative Tanner supposed to be here?
The members assigned Moffitt, Lekis, Sodi, Litchfield, Tanner, Cornell, and Hall. And if Linda can't be here, and I'd like to have a motion and some sort of a motion and vote today because the clock is ticking. I have no problem if Linda doesn't make it, or if Melissa said she's on her way, but if I have no problem if Dave wants to sit in for Linda if she's not going to make it. Is that an issue question?
I think she had put in an amendment, and I don't see an 0820H, because I think the bill says school district, and I think her amendment added charter schools to that.
Sure. I remember when this first came through that she had an amendment. Actually, it's one that I like personally and wanted to integrate for our purposes today, and the chair is in the House as well. I'm looking for, this being an interim study committee, nothing that happens here is going to become in the statute process. All this is going to be is actually like the gifted bill, which went to interim study, talked about it, and recommended the concept, and then in subsequent term, the bill came back and reflected new language that came up from the interim study work. So for our purposes today, we don't need to and probably shouldn't try to get into amendments. That's not what this is about. As I see it, this is simply about giving some sort of a yay or nay on the bill so that we can pass that on to the full committee And then if there's similar legislation submitted next year, the work from this subcommittee will be useful in coming to, discussion on a future bill.
So Mike, do we have an example of what the in-classroom observer policies are and what the in-classroom audiovisual streaming and recording policies are or look like?
Good question. I don't have that. And again, I'm going to harken back to some earlier measures like the gifted bill. What we finally tried and succeeded in avoiding with that bill in interim study is getting too much down into detail in the weeds in the interim study process.
Yeah, so that's not really what I'm asking for. What I'm trying to get a better understanding of, and maybe Attorney Fenton can help shed some light on this. I don't know if we heard. I don't have my notes with me from the hearing on this, but I think I recall there being a question about whether this could have implications on school safety, student safety, faculty safety, and certainly seeing at least examples of what these policies look like might help us better understand what possible impact they might have. But maybe Diana's has some information on how these policies could read on student, staff, school safety.
Okay, before I look to Attorney Fenton, speaking for myself here, what I don't personally want to see us get wrapped up in is getting into examples and details and debate about this aspect or this policy or that or whatever. The issue here is in very broad, simple, general terms. Can we ask districts to, regardless of what their policy is, to simply share what is already public policy?
Yeah, so we're talking past each other, Mike. I'm not saying that I'm not implying that this legislation should establish a framework for such policies. But if it's common that these policies contain information that could impact school safety, student safety, staff safety in any way, then I think we should understand that as a committee and take that into consideration whether or not this is recommended for future legislation or not. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it needs to say what's in or what's out of these policies, but if it's common that these types of policies would contain information that could impact student or school or staff or faculty safety, then I think we should understand that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to track what you're saying, and again, to repeat myself, I guess, I just don't see our role as being to get into, details of which it sounds like you're alluding to in terms of wanting to see a model. Once we see a sample, then, we can spend a whole lot of time on the merits of whatever model you talk about. That's not what I think we want to do. I think what we want to do is decide if we want to have a report requirement sharing public information in one place. Again, as I keep saying, as was the case with gifted. Sure, Representative Lekis.
I think what the issue here is if a school's policy is specific enough that it gives away information that might be used by somebody, say how they video the hallways or where they're videoing or whatever, if it's specific enough that, and these reports will be public presumably, could somebody use them? This reports that are being submitted to the DOE, could somebody use them to break into the school, to do whatever? And we need to think about that when we suggest this, that we would want a sort of generic policy and not something specific enough that's going to give away. Is that what you're? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I just recently met this past 2 weeks ago with the Infrastructure Commission, which I also chair, and we were handing out grant funds. We're working in conjunction with Jennifer Harper's now gone from the Homeland Security as the director, and there's a new director over there. I believe it's Robert Buxton. We also had present at that meeting Eddie Edwards, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Safety, Department of Safety here in the state. We were handing out on the first round of grants here regarding safety, security in the schools, access to schools, communications in schools with outside emergency services. We had to do that meeting in closed session. We weren't discussing any of that policy due to the fact we are talking about a very sensitive area in schools right now, and also with Homeland Security, how they're looking at these applications. They had to do that in accordance with their criteria, and that criteria is confidential. And so, yes, Representative Luna, you bring up an excellent point. We cannot get into that realm. We can't go there. The schools are working that. And as you recall, when we were looking initially for the emergency operation plans to be forwarded to DOE, there was concern from superintendents and school administrators, that principals, that by submitting that, are we releasing this confidential information and we don't know where it's going? And that was, they were even concerned in sending that stuff to the data processing people at Homeland Security. So this is very sensitive territory. We got to be careful.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I am having some deja vu here again. What I see you doing is what happened again years ago with the gifted bill, where we're what about this and what about this scenario, getting down the weeds, and that is not where is a prime sponsor. That's not what I'm looking to get into or was looking to get into this. Our purpose here today is not to get into all these details and scenarios. Our purpose, as I see it, as the prime sponsor and the chair of this interim study committee, is simply to recommend or not that the concept of having a best practices folder be put into place. Seeing as Attorney Fenton is here, I know that she's already spoken to all this. If I could ask Diana, do you mind coming up to where you've sat many times in the past, very briefly? So my question to Diana is simply, the purpose of this is to have a central virtual folder, if you would, to centralize public information. All of these existing policies are published policies, so there's no need to, as I see it, to take special put in place special safeguards for something that's already public policy. So anyway, Attorney Fenton, my question to you is if you could speak to what you did the last time about DOE doing the same thing with this report as you did with gifted.
Sure. Thank you for the question. For the record, Diana Fenton from the Department of Education. To answer Representative Luna's question, I myself am not familiar with these policies. I am making an assumption that school districts have these types of policies on their website available to the public. But I'm not here to speak from personal knowledge about that. I know the last time we were here, we did talk about that potential safety security issue. When we deal with Homeland Security issues and, for example, school districts have to submit, as Representative Ladd is well aware, they have to submit their blueprints, their safety plans. That information by law is not accessible under 91A. So we cannot turn those over to the public, and there's a very valid security reason behind that, and they are housed with Homeland Security. It's not within the purview of the Department of Education. In terms of this proposed bill in front of us, my testimony before, my testimony today is simply that based on the language of the law that is ultimately passed, anticipating that it would mirror in large part what was passed as it pertains to gifted students, talented and gifted students, the department would set up a similar format by which it's electronic. We do have a proposed template that districts can use so that there is consistency in reporting. Consistency is always key. I think the definition is each district can create their own definition of what they consider gifted and talented. And then we put it in a folder that is accessible for people. I know that that was one of the concerns from the department when that bill, not this bill, but that bill was first proposed, is how this information would be accessible, what the department would do with it. And that was the compromise that we reached.
Thank you much. Questions for Attorney Fenton? Representative Bruno.
So thanks very much. So, Diana, I was just trying to find a link on the DOE site to what are the required statutory required school board policies, and I believe from time on the board that there is a required policy for audio video recording. I don't know if it's the same as what's being asked of here. I don't recall if there's a required policy for in-classroom observers. Do you know if that's a required policy?
The short answer is I don't off the top of my head. I know that there was a law that was passed a few sessions ago that talked about in-classroom observations. And I think there's a notice requirement affiliated with that. I don't know if there's a policy requirement. So these are great questions to flush out. And it is at this moment in time that I can say, while being recorded, I did not bring my law book today. And I knew I forgot something. So I knew I packed my lunch and my laptop, and I knew I forgot something, and that's it. So I do know that there is a law that talks about those in-classroom recordings. But I think your point is well made, is figuring out the difference between the two. And especially since COVID, those are probably areas that get very muddled from a district perspective.
And I think to that extent, if it's not a required school board policy, then it could be an administrative practice, and which could contain sensitive information like what Rick was talking about that hadn't been aired during a public hearing.
I can't remember the number of years ago when Representative Cordelli presented his bill on recording in the classroom, which caused a tsunami of concern from all the districts. And we got into the area of special education services, who's qualifying confidential information. We got into the business of student teachers that are practicing, are doing their internship or whatever in the classroom, and how do you record that even with the special service child? So I don't have my folder with me either today. My yellow book's in there, but that wouldn't help me. My folder would help me on this one. But I think that this is an area that if we're looking for, boilerplate policies, I believe those are in place from the School Boards Association. And I've seen those. But then this is where we had that meeting when Glenn got, tripped up with this same legislation. And we had a huge meeting over there with all districts participating, including folks from DOE. And I can't remember which district it was. It's down where Terry Wolf came from, and Bedford area. And they had a technician down there that was trying to write this boilerplate for all school districts, that we could have that come from there. So that's my extent of it without having my materials in front of me.
Yeah, I think the law was passed in 2016, maybe
Yeah.
2017. Yeah. That's your framework. But again, I think there's the in-class recording law and then what districts have created policy-wise from there. And so if we start with finding the law, then we can reach out to the School Boards Association and see what their boilerplate policy is. And then it would be up to this committee to decide from there where, if at all, they want to go with what information they want to.
Sure, thank you. The Cordelli bill, I've heard a lot about that, Chairman Ladd, and this is not anything like that at all. Again, for the umpteenth time, the gifted bill, the intent of that was to raise awareness of a situation in some districts where some gifted students weren't being taken care of. So now that the gifted bill is law, every district, it's on their radar screen, and by having to submit a report to DOE that requires the districts to at least, look at the issue. There's no, in that case, neither in that case nor this case, is there any policy requirement or spending mandate. All it is, in this case, is asking for public information to be shared with DOE. Now, as with gifted, the intent behind this, candidly, is because we're in a whole new world. Like years and years ago, there was no such thing as Zoom. We're on YouTube right now. So largely because of COVID, when we have all these new scenarios with hybrid classes and recording and questions about who's watching at home and can somebody record. I mean, there's privacy issues there. Our intent is not to address those at all, other than to raise awareness that these are new issues that need attention. And a good way, if not the best way to do that, is to through the requirement of a report to DOE to share good ideas. And if there are some policy, if some schools in this process discover that they don't have policies that are adequate, then they can go to this folder and see, okay, this school is doing this, and that's a good idea. And so we can improve our policy by just comparing what we have or don't have to what other schools are doing via this central virtual folder, if you will, just like the gifted bill. Very, very simple. So I know I keep saying Rick is heading down into all kinds of details, and so is Dave, and not where I want to go or we need to go. Basically, do we want to have a report requirement for recording policies the way we did with gifted, or not? Representative, I was going to say Carter, Representative Hall.
Okay, you keep saying, and we all keep, as was with the gifted case. Do we know, I guess Attorney Fenton's gone, but do we know how that has worked out? Do we know, so if you're basing it on that, I'm assuming that was very successful, and I don't think that that's really the case, because it hasn't even, that's what I'm saying. We're basing on something we don't know the effect of, correct?
Oh, sure. Good question, and a fair question. Gifted just became law, so there's really nothing yet to compare it to until the schools have time to in fact, it's going into effect this coming year.
Right.
So it's right. I mean, it is. But again, it's just a folder of a folder to collect policies. It's as simple as that. Yes, Representative Lekes.
So if we ask for the public policy, would that then eliminate the issue of safety and all of that? Because we're only asking for their already public policies? I don't know how to word that to say, their general policy that, like, they might even tell the parents or be on their website or something like that, as opposed to their, detailed, this is what we do for, and we're just talking about classroom monitoring and, right? I mean, not hallway monitoring and that kind of stuff anyways, that's not in.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's all kinds of really interesting details and scenarios that we could get into. I don't want to here. But if this comes back in some form next year, somehow, some way, there are a lot of things that really do need some discussion and perhaps statute. Don't really know, but if we have, if the schools can share whatever their policies are in one place, then that'll be a step in the right direction. Without a statutory requirement for schools to share their policies with DOE, some schools I don't think would do anything, or wouldn't do much or whatever. And yes, this has come up before. Why doesn't DOE just issue a memo and say, send us your information? The imprimatur of statutory action shows that this is like an important, it's not some memo, send us your, kindergarten numbers. No, this is potentially very important, and so it rates, I think, some sort of statute to underscore that this is an area that, people need to pay attention to. Well, trying to get into details. Sure, Representative Litchfield.
Thank you, Representative Moffett. I wanted to ask, since I was not here before, regarding where we tried to put some bills out there regarding recordings in the schools and the classrooms, and you mentioned that there were an array of people that came to speak on it. Are we talking administrators, teachers, and staff, or are we talking parents? Because I think those may be two very different viewpoints on this particular topic.
Sure, another great question, and I'll say the same thing that I've said to other points or comments that have come up about, who does this involve as well, parents or whatever. Great questions. There's so many great questions that need attention, and so that is something that would come out of this if at some point next year or whenever we have this requirement that schools organize their policies, their public policies, and send them to DOE because of the statutory requirement. I hope that helps somewhat. Yeah, sure.
No. So I am curious still, though, who was it that came out to those meetings to speak? Was it school staff that don't want recordings? Or was it parents that said, my kids won't be safe? Because from what I'm hearing right now, a lot of parents are coming out and saying, I want to see what's happening in the school. So I would like to know if anybody knows that. That's number one. And then number two, if you don't mind kind of unpacking this for me, for all of us, when we talk about what would this look like? For example, you're saying that a school send in a report. Can you give us a visualization of how you think that might be broken down, what a report might look like? I mean, I'm not talking like you have to go through 12 pages worth, but, just a simplified table of contents. What exactly are you thinking?
Sure. If you're asking me, my vision of it, as Attorney Fenn said, again, going back to the gifted bill, they did create a template, a helpful template to share with the districts on how they could submit whatever policies they had in the gifted area. So to your question, if some version of this requirement, this reporting requirement move forward, I'm sure DOE would do the same thing. They create some sort of a template, and there's a word that they have, an advisory, or I think, or something like that, that gives the districts guidance in terms of how to respond to a reporting request. Hopefully that helps a little bit. I know you were asking about reporting formats and what might be in there. Again, I think they could satisfy this by simply sending an email. Frankly, I mean, I don't want to get too prescriptive. But I think that to respond to the DOE request for a report on recording policies and classroom observation policies, they could simply send an email to a designated person or whatever at DOE with attachments, and here's our policies, and you can file them. Simple as that.
Mike, we're talking two different topics right here within this bill. In-classroom recordings and classroom observers.
Right.
Okay, now I'll take the latter first. The in-classroom observers, that comes down oftentimes, yes, you do have a boilerplate policy on that. New Hampshire School Boards Association has this stuff. But then how you implement within the school is going to be not necessarily a policy, but an administrative guideline or administrative dictate in the individual school. For example, when I was a school principal in an elementary school, we had the policy where we didn't want to see a lot of parents in school the first week of school, especially when we're talking about young children that are trying to break away from parents. It was a lot easier for the teacher, much easier to manage and to try to get that degree in independence we had to and get the socialization skills going. We also had it within our policy or guideline. It was more like a guideline for us to follow because it was administrative in nature. That when we were giving the statewide assessment, and we've been giving that all over the country for years, we didn't have visitors during that at all. That was when parents were not welcome. So if we're looking for this type of information, that's certainly available through the individual schools. That could be done through a survey easily and gotten. There's then you get into the observers that come in and want to see, okay, what is our social studies curriculum really like? I want to see that class taught. Well, it was just yesterday at the polls, I was talking to the new math teacher down at Rivendell. That's Fairleigh, Vermont, and Orford. It's an interstate government district. And I said, I'd like to see what you're doing in mathematics. He said, wow, I'd love to see it come in the classroom. I'm going to talk with the folks in the 6th grade, the 7th and the 8th. It's a middle school. And it's a result of all of us knowing that we've seen slippage since COVID in mathematics. And our kids who've been out are sometimes down 5 months, 6 months in their learning, and we're having to try to address how we're going to accomplish that. My school district, SAU 23, is going through a revision of the entire curriculum as a result of that, and purchasing a new program that's more aligned with we hope to get the analytics done so we can find out exactly where the holes are in mathematics, be it, as I spoke to some earlier, geometry or numeration or some other aspect of learning, so that we don't have to replace the whole thing, but figure out where our weaknesses are so we can see the growth. Well, he's advised me that we'd love to see it come into the classroom, and when I requested to get in there and see that from the perspective of here we are in the education committee looking at it, they welcomed us, said you're welcome to come in. They know that there's a real good purpose to help growth and improvement. Now, when you're coming in to just look at it in terms of are you teaching about George Washington or Martin Luther King or whomever in your history program or social studies program, civics, I think they welcome that as well. I think that where the big concern would be is that if you're getting into certain classes which are special service classes, you're getting into classes that are involving some youngsters, and you may only have 2 or 3 kids in there, or we talk about confidentiality on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and Representative Beaumont say you have a school of less than 10 kids, you can figure out who's taking the test just by the answers. You can see the names and all that stuff too when you're observing. So there got to be that level of understanding and confidentiality. So we're in an area that I'd love to see some of the stuff that I mentioned earlier about when and how are people welcome into the building. We certainly don't want people not welcomed. And I think that's where schools are as well. But there's got to be some conditions in there too. And so that part I understand. I'm having a hard time, though, understanding when we're getting into the boilerplate stuff, which we've gone through. And Representative Dordelli, it wasn't just one bill. It was several bills. It was the first bill, which we made the errors on, and the second bill, which had to correct the errors. And I know that for a fact that's what the policy is in all the schools right now, because that was that went through a lot of discussion through various groups and organizations. So I think we're into a topic, Mike, that's going to be, it's very, very complex. And I don't know if necessarily a survey is going to give you everything you want. I think you'd be wiser trying to seek out some of the stuff from the School Boards Association and find out, because they're representing all these schools.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So what just happened here is the beauty of what the intent of this bill is, okay? Which I think is really cool. So Chairman Ladd got into all these areas that I would love to discuss and talk about, but that's not the point of this bill. If some version next year were to move forward from this bill, what would happen in district after district would be, because districts and board members, and administrators and teachers and parents would see that there's a need to just send a report to DOE, they would sit down like we're doing here, like Rick's and Dave and Alicia and Melissa are thinking about specific scenarios. The beauty of this is that with no financial requirement, no spending, no policy mandated spending or financial spending mandate of any sort, this type of discussion will flow forth everywhere that would not have happened otherwise. And so holes, and there are a lot of holes in policies. The purpose of this bill is not to have any policy mandate. It's simply to get this on the radar screens of districts that need to, in this brave new world with the technology that it is, to address some of these issues that Rick and others are thinking about. But that's not the point of this bill. This measure is simply asking for a report to DOE, which will get it on districts' radar screens. I know I'm repeating myself, but and again, this reminds me so much of the gifted bill. I keep going back to that, but it's the same concept. And went to interim study, and we get in the weeds about what about this or about that, and finally it came out of interim study. Mel voted for it, and Mary Guile and Barbara Shaw. It was very bipartisan. And Dan Wolf, and we finally people realized we're not getting into policy. We're just asking for a report that will be and provide an impetus for local discussion where it needs to happen. So
Yeah, but the title of the bill says policy.
I have it right here.
Requiring reports concerning school policies on classroom recordings and in-classroom observers.
Yes, it's asking for a report of existing public policies. It's not mandating a policy. It's just asking to share what you have in place. Yeah? Others? Sure.
Thank you, Representative Moffett. And you may have said this earlier. I apologize if I missed it. Was there a specific situation or experience that prompted you to move forward with this bill? I understand it's similar to the gifted bill. I understand that, but I'm just curious. Oftentimes, I think there's a personal experience or a constituent may come forward, and that kind of prompts us to say, you know what, you're right, let's take this further.
Great question. I understand the question. And yeah, so what prompted people to talk to me and for me to follow up with this bill? Several things. One example would be when there are remote classes and via Zoom or whatever the platform is, privacy questions, people were saying, so when students are watching classes remotely, can they record it or not? And, who's going to watch? And are they going to be, archived? Or what if a student embarrasses himself or herself in class that's remote, that's recorded? I'm not saying what the policy should be, but you ask what was the impetus behind shining light on this. Does that help? And there's many other, I could give, that's one specific example. In terms of classroom observations, I was a classroom teacher, and there were policies about if a parent wanted to come in. But what if, when I was a teacher, they didn't have these things. So that without suggesting any specific policy, I think there's a need to, in terms of classroom observations or visitations by parents or whomever, limiting it. Can a parent pull out this and record. I don't know. I'm not saying that whether they should or shouldn't. That's a local decision. But if something like this moves forward, then, you know, it'll be addressed locally and it needs to be. I mean, it's really important, Rick, and, you know, asking for like a survey. I've already said this. Sure, we could ask for surveys, but again, to have something in statute shows that this is important, that districts need to have some local conversations and share what works or doesn't work. Anything else?
Well, I do know that you mentioned one point that is kind of interesting to me too, is your cell phone. That is opening up a whole arena now of opening up the classroom to that. And I just talked just the other day again with one of our junior high grandkids, and you know, and he's really upset. The girls in the class can have the cell phones, the boys can't. You know, and of course that's coming from a junior high kid. And some are using them, some are not, and so it's different, I guess, in every school. And if you want to have some consistency within the school, that's up to that school staff to sit down with their parent advisory council or with the school board and try and figure that one out. I know I've been in some schools where they, you know, just don't let them take their cell phones out during the instructional phase of the class. And I think that's what should be done. You know, as a librarian, you don't want somebody in there messing with their phone when you're trying to talk about, you know, the literature you're trying to, you know, the genre you're trying to get into. So there are needs for common basic policies in that arena, and that if this bill is going to gather us that information, I applaud it, because we do need to have, you know, I'm sure teachers are looking for support on this one as well, because it becomes a disciplinary issue for them when they have to keep saying to, you know, little Deb over here, hey Deb, put it away, put it away. If not, you're going to go down and see Mr. Principal right here, and so. But every school is different on that, you know?
Yeah, exactly, Rick, what you just said, thank you. And again, when Rick was getting, or Chairman Ladd was getting into the scenario of the cell phones, I mean, that's really interesting and important stuff that needs to be talked about. I'd love to debate it here. That's not, again, I apologize for repeating myself, but I think Rick's helping now finally to shine a light on this very simple intent of this measure, which is just to get an important, very important issue on the radar screens so that the districts can have overdue discussions. Some are ahead of others.
Would it be easier then, Mike, to say, here's a survey, do you have a policy or an administrative guideline in your school regarding use of cell phones in the classroom? Are kids allowed to have it? They'll say, I have to call my parent's going to call me, I have a doctor's appointment, so that, you know, and it's going to change during the course of the day and I need to know when that is.
So I don't want to talk about cell phones in here today,
no,
Mr.
but
Chair.
that's reporting and recording and all that stuff as well.
Yes, and so that's the beauty of this bill is this, what's happening here is, you know, there's discussions that need to happen. And so without getting into specific policies, I mean, I have ideas about cell phones I'd love to share. That's not what this is about. This is about providing an impetus for this discussion to happen in places where it might not have otherwise, and it needs to, some of us feel. Representative Litchfield.
Okay, I might move down a few seats. I'm afraid to ask. You're getting passionate here. I have a question for you, in a good way, by the way. I admire it. My question to you is, when you're talking about this and you're talking about these conversations that are going to happen, and I can see the more you're talking about, I can see what you're saying, that there are all these policies out there, and really who really does sit down and kind of put it all together, right? They're just out there. You're right, online in that policy manual. My question is, where do you envision these conversations happening? Would it be, do you think at the administrative level? Because if it is behind closed doors, I don't know how much it would benefit the public or the parents. Whereas if it was at, let's say, a school board meeting, I think that would be really helpful, actually. So I'm just curious.
Sure, another great question. So where do we envision these conversations taking place? The answer is, I'm not exactly sure. Every district, every school has its own little culture. So if some version of this next year would come to this committee and come out of this committee asking for a report to DOE. Then the school districts, the SAUs, would get a memo or a message from DOE saying, please, up by this date, send us a report sharing your public policies on classroom visitations and recording procedures, whatever. So, Melissa, what I think would happen, I'm sure, whether it's, as I said before, school board members, parents, faculty, administrators, whomever, having a meeting, talking about cell phones and talking about coming to class. And out of that, locally, there will be different policies that need to be in place. Some places are ahead of others in terms of this brave new world of cell phones and Zooms and visits and recording and privacy. So I just trust the localities to just come together and have this discussion and come up with policies that need to be in place. And if some really interesting if one district comes up with some interesting scenario that nobody else had thought of, then and they share that, then by sharing all these things, it helps everybody to get to better places to come up with policies that work locally. Sure.
Am I missing something? I mean, we've got the School Board Association, where school board members get together and talk about things. We've got the School Administrators Association that hold, I think, at least monthly meetings, the Southwesters, the different areas, where superintendents and senior administration get together, talk about things, have speakers to come in and talk about certain things. We've got, there's a Principals Association, I believe, where principals get together.
And just 2 days ago or several days ago, you and I attended the Special Education Administrators Association.
Right. So I guess I don't know what I'm missing. If this is such a big issue, either at the school board level, the administration level, the principals level, the special education level, there seems to be lots of opportunity for already for school leaders to get together and discuss things and figure out how to proceed with it and really understand what the impact is. One of the difficulties I'm having here, Mike, is that we're during this study, we're not actually hearing from people like Jane Bergeron or Carl Ladd or Dean Cascadden or others in this area, and I agree completely with what Rick's saying, that this is a very complicated area that potentially affects and impacts a lot of different things. I mean, if I'm the parent of a special education student, I already know that in small districts, the department is protecting my student's identity from being exposed to members of the community who later on in March may be voting on budgets. And but I'm not sure that any of these policies would necessarily protect my interests as a parent of a special education student, particularly as it relates to in-classroom observation. I agree that a lot of conversation has to be had around it, but I don't think all of a sudden creating a big pile of what's in place right now is where that starts. So I'm just putting it out there that I've got a lot of concerns about accumulating information in policies that may or may not be already required by the state. And I mean, all right, I'm not going to be I'm not a fact witness to the education committee. None of us really are supposed to be that, but I think at least in many of our experiences on school boards, in administration, realize that the School Boards Association has a lot more model policies than are required by the state of New Hampshire. So I just want to leave it at that I think there's sufficient concern.
Sure. To your point about, you mentioned Carl Ladd or the different associations and all these folks and structures that are in place, what would this do to that? Again, for the umpteenth time, I go back to the law that this is modeled on, which is the gifted law. I will tell you that many schools, and we'll find out better as this information comes in, we're doing little or nothing in this area where they probably should, and now they will, because there's a new statute, a new law that requires schools to pay attention to an area that deserves attention. So similar to this, I'm sure, clearly, as you keep saying, it's very complicated. And as Chairman Ladd has said, it's complicated. Well, if it's complicated, then there's a need for localities to pay attention to this and address some of these complexities and come up with some policies that I think clearly need to be in place. And through statute, that it means something. You know, if Education Committee or the House says this is important enough for us to ask that you have a discussion about it and share your policy in a central location, only good, I think, can come out of communication and discussion. Okay, I know it's almost 3. Somebody, and I'm going to be looking for a motion of some sort, whether to support this concept for future possible legislation or not. But
Representative Moffett, may I just,
please.
so the statute in question is RSA 189:68. And so again, 189:68, and it's paragraphs 3, 4, and 5, which deal with in-classroom recording. Those were passed in 2015 and 2016 respectively. So Representative Ladd and I got the dates right, which is a miracle. That rarely happens on my part, at least. I will not read it to this committee. It is rather lengthy, but you can refer to that statute. And that's where it talks about the in-classroom recording piece of it.
Sure, and thank you. And I point out that 2015, 2016 predates the COVID pandemic, which created some new scenarios that some of us think would need attention.
It is a period of time now referred to as before the pandemic.
Right.
And then there's during the pandemic and after the pandemic. So yes, it is before the pandemic, yeah.
Our post-pandemic world.
Mike, I've been visiting a number of elementary schools. Just the other day, I was up at the Landaff School. Prior to that, a number over in Vermont. And I was surprised when I walked over to Vermont and wanted to go into school. Welcome, you're in the school. Some of that pandemic stuff, which we all encountered, that you couldn't even get in a school. You had to knock and leave the stuff off for the kid outside, and they came to the door and greeted you. And I know there was a number of disgruntled folks wanting to get in and see instruction because it was a time of awakening for many parents. Here's what's being taught in school, and perhaps I agree or perhaps I don't agree with what's going on. And so you want in. What is the policy for getting in and observing a classroom might be what we're looking at, but I would say that we are returning, and I see it happening right now today. I can go to many of the schools, and I'm walking right in. They say, hello, come on in. But if this happened last year or the year before, I wouldn't have been welcomed in those schools. So I think we're going to be trying to go back to what is so-called normal. Now, what is normal? It may be different from school to school. And again, it's about the leadership in the building. It's about the school boards in that district and what their attitude is. And I don't know if we're ever going to change that due to the fact we have elected officials, just as we are, running those schools. And they're in charge of curriculum and instruction, and it's a local affair. It's a local responsibility. I think the way we're going to really change access to schools is from a local perspective, of parents saying, I'd like to be able to get in. Now, if that's the problem, they can't get in and observe a classroom, they're being told, no, you're not welcome in there, then we have a problem. We're going to have to address that. So I guess I really am, because I'm having a difficult time understanding, because we do have policies. I can remember that hot debate we had back in 2015 and 16, and it went in 2 years, and now we're trying to find out, okay, submit your stuff so that we can find out what's going on. Let's find the best practices and share that with everybody else. Is that not being done through the School Boards Association now? I don't know. But they do have these boilerplates, which they, give everybody, just like the municipal government gives select boards and city councils that information.
Other comments, thoughts? Sure.
Okay. It's kind of a three-parter, so it's a little disjointed. I do want to say that I know this is going to impact many different people, and there are large concerns about the different groups it will impact. There's no other way to say it, so I mean it with the best of intentions, not in a combative way. But this has been posted, the interim study, twice now. And I'm wondering if it would adversely impact, or if this was a hot topic and they were that passionate about it, wouldn't they be here right now? Or is that not typical with an interim study? That's my first question.
Well, it's a published meeting, and people, I suspect, or a few are probably watching now or can watch later to hear our discussion on this.
Okay, so just that's what I'm wondering, if it's that controversial.
Rick, you might be able to address that. You've got an interim study meeting where you sent out an email to certain experts to come to the meeting.
Well, we've done that with a number of
That's what we do.
And
right.
For example, we have an interim study it's coming up dealing with, well, it's not interim study necessarily, but we have the Legislative Oversight Committee that's scheduled out around the block here, and we're going to be looking at contacted DOE, and we know we're going to have some very important people there. We did the same thing with teacher shortage just a few days ago. And we had, not a full house. We only had maybe 5 or 6 people in attendance there. You're not going to get a lot of attendance during interim studies. It's just the history of the planet here. Summertime people are gone, and we're right now in September, and most folks right about now are back at school picking kids up at the door. It's that time of year when we're going through change. In the past, when we've had interim studies, we've had some interim studies in concussion and all that years ago, we had people coming in and participating because it was an issue that was of concern and needed address. This one may need address, but I certainly, I don't see the people attending it.
Well, and I know you have a couple of follow-ups.
Thank you.
Again, this is not getting into anything that Glenn did years ago. This is simply saying, we'd like to have you submit a report with your public information. Not looking to get into debates on specific policies or cell phones or anything else. Again, I know I'm repeating myself and I apologize, but it took a while with the gifted bill to go through interim study, and I'm having flashbacks because with interim study with gifted, Chairman Ladd, we were getting all these questions about we got to do this or do that, about this or about that, and all that was finally, folks figured out it's just a report, and it's a report that'll help people to pay attention to something that needs to be paid attention to. And so it's law, and I feel great about that because I'm sure that all kinds of good things are now going to happen in terms of discussion about neglected gifted students. And in this case, it's the same, that's the model for this. If we ask for the reports on this important area, then the local discussions will take place. To me, it's very, very simple. And I think we're making it more complicated than we need to. But Melissa, you had some follow-up, right?
I just, the other comment that I had was, I know that there are several groups that probably could address these principles, right? New Hampshire School Board Association, you're talking about the Superintendent Association. You've heard me talk about this before. I have grave concerns whenever we bring up the New Hampshire School Board Association because it is a lobbying group. they have hundreds of thousands in their bank account. I've researched it, I've seen it. So if parents want to look at those policies that they have, we're talking about they have a wide array. I don't know that we have access to them as parents. You have to pay, what is it, a couple $1,000s, or it might even be dependent upon your student population per head, to be a part of that. I don't know that as a general public we have access to that. I do like the idea of this information being put in a centralized location. I've even had parents come to me with concerns now that policies are being stored electronically. Have these policies been changed without people even realizing it? And whether it's valid or not, I don't know, but I've had parents bring it to me. I like the idea of this being centralized. I like the idea of us kind of wiping the dust off and taking a look at it. I personally would like to support Representative Moffett in his endeavor. So with that being said, I would like to make a motion to move forward with this.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
So we have a motion to recommend that we move forward with the simple recommendation that we support the report requirement from districts to DOE. Okay, further comments, discussion on the motion? Okay, if not, let me look at our assigned folks here. Representative Lekis, yay or nay on that motion?
Yay.
Representative Soto, you seconded it.
Yay.
Representative Litchfield.
Yay.
Representative Tanner is not here, but Representative Luno is a no. Representative Cornell. No. And Representative Hall.
No.
And the chair supports the motion. So thank you. We have a 4-3 recommendation to send to the full committee. Thank you for the motion. Thank you for your time. And we have a second interim study measure that we're supposed to start at 3 o'clock. So maybe in 5 minutes, let me see who's on that. Moffett, Hobson, Lekis, Litchfield, Luno, Ellison, and Hall. So we're all here. So 5 minutes? Or you want to start right now? Yeah. All right. Well, okay, I have a request for 2 minutes. I'm gonna be Chairman Ladd and say 5 minutes, but I mean it, 5 minutes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. All right, folks, I think it was 6 minutes, whatever it was, but I know everybody's time is valuable. Attorney Fenton is in the house and will soon be out of the house, so we want to utilize her expertise and experience in addressing, taking some questions. We need a policy on cell phones. I like that. Power off, okay. Well, we need to decide, who manages the fund and what's it used for. So anyway, so now we're talking about HB 1295. Here it is. We just did 1295. So we're talking about, I have it right here. Yeah, 1676, and that has to do with incentive grants. So before Attorney Fenton leaves, Diane, if you could, it's a very simple bill. You've been here before. It had a house, it had a committee hearing. We've already had one interim study hearing. So you know the simplicity of the concept. We want to give DOE a fund to reward achievement. So if you could speak to DOE dealing with such a concept.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Diana Fenton. I'm an attorney with the Department of Education. I apologize that I have to make my hasty retreat for 3:30 with the commissioner, so we can blame this on Frank, as I blame all my problems. So based on the concept that you have explained to me, it is the department's position that this could be best fulfilled by giving the department rulemaking authority. So in technical terms, you'll find rulemaking in 541-A. That's the statute that covers rulemaking. And when you look at the various statutes that comprise education, some of them require the department to go into rulemaking. So for example, in last session, the bill for co-curricular activities grants, which I know Representative Moffett was a part of. Representative Mullen was a part of that bill. It was interesting that that bill gave the department, it wasn't mandatory rulemaking, it was optional. And typically you see mandatory rulemaking. And it's in rulemaking that the department flushes out the details of the statute. So a great example of that would be Innovation Schools, which was passed in a past legislative session. The department has entered into rulemaking on that. EFAs, the department went into rulemaking on that. But that rulemaking has to be in the statute. We, the department cannot just arbitrarily go into rulemaking. It has to be allowed for, required in the statute. So if it is this legislative body's intention to have a somewhat simple, and I use that word lightly, simple statute that gives the department authority to create this program, then in order to facilitate that, the department would need rulemaking authority to do that. And I'm happy to take any questions as it pertains to that.
Thank you, Attorney Fenton. So let me follow up then. You mentioned the co-curricular bill, which is now law. I was the original sponsor of that, and that's another bill that went to interim study. If you recall, it was initially a unified sports bill, went to interim study. Representative Lang took it over, Representative Mullen. So it had a long journey. Now it's law. So you mentioned rulemaking to implement that through DOE. My question is the structure that is in place for rulemaking that you used and that we used to implement the co-curricular bill, can that same structure be used for this proposed bill, or do you need some new language for rulemaking?
So the idea behind the co-curricular bill was really based upon the robotics grant bill, which passed before the pandemic, 2019, 2020. And so the idea behind those two bills was to give the department about $50,000. I know $50,000 was the co-curricular amount. And then the department would then disperse grants upon application up to $4,000 for certain things. And co-curricular, it's uniforms and equipment. And there are certain criteria that go with those grants. And that is the school districts can apply for it or they don't have to apply for it. So I think the structure in implementing the idea before us here would be a little different. It's not something you would necessarily apply for, it would be awarded to, but it would be awarded based on certain criteria. And it's that criteria and the amount and kind of the rules by which the department would work within that would be facilitated best by rulemaking. Another great example of when we used our rulemaking authority, I always go back to it, was Representative Ladd's Code of Conduct bill. The Code of Conduct law is very brief. It just sets out 4 principles. And then it was the department's responsibility pursuant to rulemaking to fully flush those principles out as to what this looks like and how the department will proceed within that structure. And that's really what if I understand your intention, that's really what this legislative body is requesting. And so it would be rulemaking that would allow the department to act within those rules, and that way it's not arbitrary. That way it's very clear to everyone what the rules are, what the department looks at, what the criteria is. It's not subjective, it's not arbitrary.
Thank you. So the 1676, as it came to us, it was a fiscal note, had to do with $1 million. Some version of this manifests itself and comes forward the next year. Looking at what is in language in the initial proposal, what I'm hearing is that you'd like to see some better language that addresses the need for rules that DOE would need to see to implement this were it ever to become law. Is that correct? The bill needs to have better language, i.e. rules.
I think in order to facilitate the intention of the bill, the department would need to create rules to facilitate it. And in order for the department to enter into rulemaking, we need rulemaking authority pursuant to RSA 541-A in its simplest form.
Okay, thank you. And my last comment would be, depending upon who gets reelected or who's in the mix next year and what, if anything, along these lines moves forward, you or DOE would certainly, I would think, be available to talk to sponsors on coming up with the language that would help to move it forward from DOE's perspective, right?
Absolutely.
That's a comfort. Thank you.
Sometimes it's a comfort, sometimes it's not.
Questions, Representative Bruno?
Thank you, Mike. So, I know we haven't had a whole lot of we've had opportunity, but maybe not much success with putting forward or working together in a bipartisan way to develop policies that actually have some stick-to-itiveness in the in the law. And obviously, the results in November, as you were alluding to, will certainly have an effect on what happens next session. But I would offer that if you were looking for some durable success with this, that we consider reorganizing it a little bit. I think it's backwards. I don't know how some districts like Manchester are going to be able to somehow magically do something that improves student outcomes in such a way that then they'll be able to get a $50,000 reward. I would suggest that the grant be based on school districts submitting an application and a proposal, and those proposals be vetted by the department, and the winning proposals be awarded $50,000 to improve student success. And I think we could probably get more bipartisan support if it was organized that way.
Yeah, I hear you. And again, I don't know if I'll be around after this month or who's going to be in the mix, but what you describe is intriguing to me. I know Attorney Fensley is leaving. Last call for questions for her. Okay. Yeah, so to what you just said, Dave, yeah, I mean, that is intriguing to me. I think what we need to do today is decide whether or not the notion of creating $1 million fund or whatever, the language in 1676 is for $1 million. We need, and I'll be looking for some sort of motion and a vote on 1676 so that we can either endorse the concept or the notion of rewarding achievement. and then send that to the full committee, and then see what out of that we might try to put together for an LSR.
Yeah, so I think you misinterpreted what I suggested. What I'm suggesting is not rewarding achievement, but actually a competitive grant process to encourage achievement. And so districts would submit proposals saying, here's what we're going to do here's what we're going to do to affect an improvement in student outcomes on I forget what I was looking at it a second ago, the standardized tests or the state, assessment exam or graduation rates or whatever you want to measure. And then it would be, like I said, it would be a competitive grant process. The grant applications would be reviewed by the department. Winners would be selected for awards, and then would receive the award to be used to put towards that initiative.
So the model you described, if a proposal is put together that has a metric, and the proposal that your school comes up with says, we propose to try these things in order to improve our standardized, pick an assessment.
Whatever, yeah.
Whatever. Representative Hobson and I actually met with some folks at DOE, and Caitlin Davis had some ideas as to what assessments they might recommend. I don't need to get in the weeds as to which assessments, but my question to you is, my comment to you is, what I'm hearing is that a proposal generated locally that had metrics for improvement, were those metrics to be achieved, then they would be eligible for some money.
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, so
What I said is the proposal would be submitted. The proposal would be judged based on whatever the department's criteria is for improving student success. The grant would be awarded to those winning those in a competitive application process. The $50,000 grant would then go to the schools, and then the school could use that $50,000 grant to fund the proposal to meet the objective outcome.
okay, so I think we're getting a better understanding of how we're looking at this. So what I'm hearing from you is that you do not expect a metric to be met in order for the money would come in response to a good plan, and then they would get the award.
Correct.
Award is
fund the plan.
Award to fund the plan as opposed to a reward for meeting a metric. Okay, so all right, so
The order of operations.
okay, Representative Lekis.
We've been kind of doing that all along, is giving money and hoping the schools have a plan and use it. And we gave a whole bunch of extra money last year specifically for them to be able to, and we asked for them to put in plans and give reports and everything on how that money gets used.
You're putting that out there, Elsh. Could you cite what that is? Because I'm not aware of what you're connecting that to.
What was that at the end of the year, we did,
1220.
No, there's the
Extraordinary Needs Grant.
yeah, that hasn't even started yet.
That hasn't started.
right, I'm just saying that we've instituted that. This is a completely different focus and means of getting change, because what we want is improvement, right? And so according to that, we're giving money to the schools, and they're supposed to have a plan, and hopefully they will improve. And this is the opposite, and it's intentionally the opposite, to say, you improve, we're going to reward you for that. And we've got the one that you're talking about, basically. I mean, it's not the money's already there. It's been given for people to improve. I think we need to have a multifaceted approach, and this is one we haven't tried yet. We've been putting money out, so let's reward instead because when somebody goes to work, they get rewarded for how they do, right? And they get a raise for doing better. And that's the way people work. They work on incentives and they work, that's the nature of humans. And so.
Don't lecture me.
Okay.
Yes, Representative Hall.
Yeah, I just want to Alicia, when they say they're supposed to have a plan, what Dave is saying is they do have a plan. They can't supposed to have, they're gonna submit a plan before they get any money. So it's not like they're gonna get the money and then maybe they'll plan it out or not. So there is a plan to get money.
I realized that was part of that extra money, whatever the extreme needs grant that we put in. They have to put in a plan. They have to have in the plan ways of evaluating, and they have to report back how it did. That's in that, we've done that. This is something different. This is so that we have a two-pronged approach to the same problem. Let's give both things the opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Lucas, and I'm tracking you. Let me just say this, and we've said this before, as we all know, we give a lot of money to schools that have deficient third grade reading scores. Okay, that's part of the funding mechanism that we have in New Hampshire. And I understand that. We understand, schools show they're struggling with teaching reading, so we want to help them. We give them money. Understand that. There are folks, myself included, that wonder if that's a perverse incentive in that it, in a sense, to some people, that's not the intent of how some folks look at it, but some people see we're giving money to schools that have, the worse they do with reading, more money we give them. So I understand the intent, but there's concerns about that.
What I suggested though, Mike, that's not the intent at all.
No, I'm not, Dave, I'm not talking to your, I'm just trying to lay this out so that you'll see the intent of this measure. So that's separate from what.
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with what I was talking about.
Right. Yeah. So this is not about that. This is about the impetus and the motivation for folks like myself who want to, in addition to giving money to schools who have deficient third grade reading scores, to let DOE come up with some sort of a formula to be determined. We don't need to get into the details on that. What we'll vote on soon is simply the notion of the concept of an incentive grant. And if this comes back in some form next year, then that'll reflect the recommendation of the subcommittee and then the whole committee. So $1 million, we've talked about this before. Why is Representative Lucas touched on? I mean, why not come up with some sort of a formula to reward achievement? And I know that's contrary to the culture of a lot of academia, but as Representative Lucas said, the notion of rewarding achievement fundamentally can work. And also, if money, I mean, we're always saying about we need to find more money for schools. Here's another $1 million, $50,000 to schools that do well, so, or that do better. And if out of that, if some school improves, whatever the formula is, we don't need to get into that. But if at some point some formula is established by DOE to reward improvement in whatever assessment is designated, then some schools may say, so what did you do differently to improve your scores? And we want to do this. We want to improve our scores too. So anyway, that's the essence of it all.
Yeah.
Sure. All right, Representative Ellison.
Just following up on that, I think it's a very perverse argument to suggest that a school district is going to enhance and improve its entire educational system by giving them $50,000. That's not common sense to say that. $50,000, might put a foreign language teacher back at Pittsfield High School because they pay so little that it might cover everyone, but it's not going to have an impact necessarily on the scores. I raised this during the testimony. that this is, in a perverse way, this is the opposite of what, and you understand this, Mike, the way the NBA and the National Basketball and the Major League Baseball goes. So this particular bill would say to me, if the Golden State Warriors won, as they did, they ought to get more draft choices. They should get more because they did well. We ought to give them more money. And the fact is that whole system is set up so that the team that does the worst they get
the first draft choice.
It's a perverse way to look at educational change.
Well, I know Representative Litchfield had her hand up. I do want to respond to just one of your comments about this does not intend to fix, quote, the entire educational system. There's no pretense of doing that. But I think that if it is a new opportunity to try something different, as was stated earlier, that can make a difference, it's not going to fix the whole educational system, doesn't claim to. But if it can identify some approaches that work, that might be emulated. Anyway, Representative Litchfield, sure.
Thank you, Representative Moffett. I feel as though we're talking about two completely different bills here. So if I could just bring us back to House Bill 1676, my question to you is, what we're working on right now with this interim study, are we able to make a positive recommendation today in favor of this, in light of the fact that Attorney Fenton mentioned that we need to kind of offer some further rulemaking authority to the DOE? I just want to make sure I understand that, please.
Sure, great question. And as I said earlier, having done a number of interim studies, Gifted being one of them, or the co-curricular bill being that Diana mentioned being another one of them, this interim study process, when the chair or whatever refers a bill to interim study, some places bills go there to die. In some cases, like with Gifted, like with co-curricular, like with these two bills I hope we're talking about here, out of this discussion, we can identify some ways to improve the language. So what I would be looking for today would be a recommendation, yea or nay, on the broad concept. And it's not the function of an interim study committee to come up with a formal proposal, because we can't do that. The session's ending. All we can do is make a recommendation as to whether the concept has value to be developed in future legislation. Does that kind of answer your question?
It absolutely does. I would like to make a recommendation that we do move forward in a positive fashion with this.
Okay, so there's a motion to move forward. So I understand your motion. Your motion is to support the concept of an incentive grant.
Yes, Representative Moffett, that is what I'm saying.
Okay, is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion to support the notion as stated in 1676 relative to making incentive grants for school districts that improve in certain assessment scores. Further, Representative Lekes?
Yeah, my understanding of an interim study was to make recommendations, not just whether to move forward with the concept, but recommendations with improvements or changes that should be made to the original bill. So if we're
Sure.
going to move something forward, should we not in that include that we need to get a hold of DOE or whatever to put the additional language in to allow for rulemaking? And I mean, I thought that was the point, was that we would be giving some specific recommendations for improvement or change that's come out of our discussions, so that whoever then can look at this when if they decide, okay, we'll go ahead and submit a bill, they can look and say, okay, well, the interim study said, oh, we need to add additional language, or we need to make the money come out of a different place, or whatever. So is that going to be part of our report?
Sure. This subcommittee's already met earlier, and from that earlier, you weren't able to be here. we sent some notes out to everybody that was a broad summary of some of the discussion items that came up, and that those notes are out there. So the motion that's on the table or on the floor supports the broad concept. Now, in terms of implementing the broad concept, I think certainly when this comes to the full committee, and we can speak to some specific ways, pluses or minuses, in terms of implementing the incentive grant notion. Now, if it's up to the folks on the subcommittee, if our report wants to have some specific recommendation that if a version of this is in a new LSR next year, that it reflect, as an example, the notes that I made, not that it's part of the motion that's on the floor, but I would take Attorney Fenton's comments about rules and giving them some better specific guidance in terms of rules for implementation. That would be part of. Go ahead, Dave. You were shaking your head.
Yeah, that's not what Attorney Fenton was suggesting. She was suggesting it's simply a technical line that has to go into a bill if you need the department, any department in the executive branch, to do rulemaking. You have to enable it through 541A. That's all. Yeah. Attorney Fenton was suggesting, not any specific framework for rules or anything like that. That's up to the department, and it's up to how the bill's laid out. Currently, the bill is set up. The title's called an incentive grant. The bill's language, as Alicia was talking about, is set up as an award. So after an outcome is achieved, then a district would get a $50,000 reward. What I've suggested is use it as a competitive grant process where districts submit a plan. So now we actually have a black and white plan of what a district is going to do and how much that's going to cost inside of this $50,000, budget. And the department could judge those, and again, this would all make its way through 541A into rules, and then the top, whatever the top 10 or whatever the department concludes or was put into the bill, applications are selected, they'll receive a $50,000 grant, and now you've empowered, you've enabled the school district to try to hit whatever benchmark they put in that grant application. I agree with everything Arthur has said. That $50,000 does not get you very far in a $172 million Manchester school district budget, particularly when the average kid in Manchester is performing at the 4th percentile. The governor said yesterday that New Hampshire's public schools are great. We're top 5 nationally. It's just not happening everywhere. And it's not happening everywhere because a lot of the districts are so severely underfunded, and obviously these are things that we learned through the School Funding Commission's work, which absolutely I think aligns with what you're suggesting, that we need to fund schools based on student outcomes. And I think there's an opportunity here to do it not with the $1 billion that the state of New Hampshire is currently spending on its public school districts, but with $1 million. And we might be able to learn some things through how the grant applications are documented, judged, and then put into effect.
Sure. Sure, a couple things, and then Melissa, back to you. What you're describing, you said at the top, I was intrigued by and interested in, but that's very different from what this bill is about. I think, Dave, that would be, and maybe should be or could be a separate LSR that takes a different approach, okay, as opposed to trying to completely turn around the intent of the incentive grant thing into what you described. And also, I have to say that, $50,000, especially from folks who I know truly care about, trying to maximize funding for schools, to diminish $1 million or $50,000 is not making. This does not intend to fix everything, but it intends to help in small ways that maybe could turn into big ways. So I hate to hear the idea of $50,000 or $1 million being, basically poo-pooed. I think it's important, and I think it's significant.
And I didn't do what you just suggested on that. I'm just suggesting that $50,000 might be able to move the needle further in a small district than in a much larger district like Manchester. So what does that mean for our larger district? What does it mean for our smaller districts? What does it mean for our better resource districts that might have the money to invest upfront to move their needle and then receive the win the prize and get $50,000 back to cover their costs when they had the resources to implement that at the beginning. I'm just suggesting that some districts don't have the resources to even consider doing this, and that continues to increase the opportunity gap that we're seeing across our state, our students' opportunity gap that we're seeing across our state between better resource districts and less resource districts. And I think we've got $1 million opportunity here to try to close that gap by $1 million.
I'm sorry, Melissa, you had your hand up, and then Alicia.
I have to say that I'm really concerned that I continue to hear the notion that more money equates better outcomes, because that's not always the case. And we keep talking and comparing these more affluent areas to Manchester. Just because you throw more money at a Manchester school is not going to change the outcome. We need to take care of the drug problems there. We need to take care of the kids there that aren't being taken care of, just in general in their home life. It has nothing to do with giving more and more money to the education system.
But you can believe whatever you want to.
You're right. I can believe whatever I want. More money does not solve these issues. The way the world is made is incentive, right? You incentivize people and you reward them. Okay? Kind of like that old saying, right? You don't just give the man the food, you can teach him to fish, right? There's a feeling of goodness when you reach your goals. I get it. You just want to throw more money. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, Representative Lucas would like to say something, please. Thank you.
Actually, I was going in the same direction, but hopefully you'll let me actually finish it, which is that this has been done over the country for decades, putting more and more money in schools to get better outcomes, to the extent that in one school, the judges said that all money must be given by the state, whatever is required. And that school district built everything that they could think of. And in fact, they had more money. They were trying to figure out what to do with it. And yet the outcomes remained the same. And that has happened for decades all across the country. And if you want the statistics, I can give them to you because they're out there. And I have spent the summer studying all of this to try to figure out what we can do. And I keep coming up with this. But what has worked in some states, in some times and in some places, is incentives. Incentives for improvement, where people are rewarded for doing better. That has worked. Throwing money in the beginning has not worked. And you can see it in state after state, year after year, all across the country. And if you want the statistics, I'll give them to you.
Thank you. Let me give you a specific, and I know we have a motion on the floor, and this is discussion on the motion, I guess. Here's an example. And there's no mandate. So I taught at Trinity High School for a while, and they had a math team. So if this incentive grant program of some sort gets into place, and if some school, the large or small, rich or poor, whatever, if on their own, somebody at that school says, let's have a math club, and we'll try to make math fun, and we'll have a club, and we'll have activities, and we'll do math. And so if out of that, some standardized math scores improve, then that would, and they get a reward, then suddenly I think the kids would feel great. I think the school would feel great. And I think that others might look and say, okay, you get $50,000, which they can use however they want. So what did you do for that $50,000? you had a math club. Well, maybe we should have a math club too. So if you're tracking me at all, I mean, that's the type of innovative, outside the box thinking that this might incentivize that could make a difference. That's just one example, if that helps. Sure, Representative Ellison.
Mike, can I speak on this? I haven't spoken on this one yet.
We may have to vote. All right, we'll just let you speak, Mr. Chair.
I'll vote, I'll speak to the discussion on the motion on the floor. So that's,
Sure, if there's no objection.
so, when we're looking at the idea of incentives, that it's very important. That's why we have the commissioner awarding blue ribbon schools here in this state annually. And there's a process, a very specific one that Diana is alluding to. And just recently, we passed, in fact, Dave was a co-sponsor on the Farm State Fair bill, in which we allocated $250,000, and 541-A was part of that, but was very specific, giving the Commissioner of Agriculture the criteria and conditions for awarding these grants for capital improvement on the state fairs. We need to, if we're going to go here, we're going to have to get in the 541 business as far as being very specific as to what this is used for and what is the criteria for awarding and what's the outcome we're looking for, what kind of data we're using, how we're analyzing data, how we're collecting data, how we're using that to show improvement. The first step that I would do here is try to work with DOE and improve upon or support some of the recognition programs that they have in place. And rather than just trying to go with another one, I would try to add to what they're doing to try to improve curriculum. Secondly, I would also work with the recently reformed Committee for the Improvement and Assessment, Legislative Oversight Committee, which we have. That meets in another couple weeks here, and I've invited Nate Green to that. Nate Green is in charge of the analytics over there at DOE, looking at these assessment reports which we have. We do not have an analyst over there at DOE right now to help us delve down into the specific areas that we are assessing. We're just looking at that top 30,000 foot score, which we get. Oh, you're a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, and you're a wonderful school, or one that's not proficient. Well, why? Where are we on these specific questions that are being asked of kids? Are we analyzing that data? No, we are not. They're not doing it at DOE because they don't have the staff to do it. And in working with Caitlin and working with Nate, we've come up, and there will be an LSR. It's already in the hopper, where we're going to be looking for, in the first year, $160,000 for an analyst, in the second year, $145,000. We will be working with specific schools to take these achievement test scores, look down underneath specific topics, like I mentioned, like mathematics, looking at specific areas, find, well, we might be doing well in this category of math, but in that one, we're hurting. That's where we're missing the boat. But they're not doing this on the district levels or on the state level either. We just don't have the staff to do it. And we need to get in that business. So my recommendation would be, I'd add to what you're going, because the incentives is a great idea, that we work with DOE to further improve incentive programs that are in place. But we also support make a recommendation to the Oversight Committee, which we reconstituted this last year in June. It was put together by the governor, or we all sponsored that. You helped write it, where they have the responsibility for assessment and performance improvement. This would be a wonderful topic to send to them too as well, and say, hey, what are we going to do to try to improve in our area of mathematics in the state? We have a long way to climb here. So incentives are great, but I think we got to be specific, and we got to work with other groups as well. Just another LSR it's going to be another year before we see any outcomes. We can get some outcomes right now if we work a little bit more at this, and I think we're in the process of doing that. I would invite you to attend the Oversight Committee. I think it's on the 27th. Pardon me? I don't have that calendar in front of me. I can get it to you. I'll get it out to everybody. But that's going to be important because we're going to have the assessment results from 2022.
I think it's the 28th.
Yeah, I think it's 27 or 28. One of the two there. where what we're doing is we're looking at cohorts of students, what they were in their third grade, what that same group was in the fourth grade by the state and by the schools, and seeing where we're going, because we know we still have that waterfall effect in the middle schools where the scores are dropping off. Why? We've known that for not just as a result of COVID. It's been on that state ever since I've been on this committee. We've been dropping, and you talk to the people at community college, they say, well, 60% of our kids come in that are remedial in mathematics. Of that 60%, 50% never get an associate's degree. And they waste a lot of money. Why? Well, then we work with Beth Dorian over there with the Math Communities program, which we had. And we had 38 high schools working that we showed improvement. But that grant has disappeared, and a lot of those courses are disappearing too. So we got to make some efforts to get something that stays in place. Dan Wolf was very involved with the Math Community Learning Labs or community program, which we have. It's in statute. There's no money to support it anymore. So I would suggest that you add to your recommendation that incentives also be put forward to the Oversight Committee, and that we work with DOE in terms of trying to strengthen some of their programs that they're currently doing and recognizing outstanding performance and growth and achievement. That's why we have now growth, not just achievement. There's some schools that are high achieving schools. How are you going to ever measure growth there? And they're doing a great job. You want to recognize them for what they're doing as well, not just an incentive, but an incentive just to continue doing what they're doing. So there's so much out there, and we also need this analyst research one to work with Nate so we can understand what this, and if anybody wants to see the wording which we have in this, the person's going to be responsible for. The academic research and improvement performance data analyst shall collect and analyze assessment data to measure student progress, evaluate program and instructional effectiveness, guide curriculum development and resource allocation, and promote accountability. We're going to have to make some of our decision making is going to have to be data decision making based upon this information, which we never really used the way we should. So I would suggest you strengthen that recommendation to the full committee to incorporate some of those other avenues where we can work and not just silo it in one little area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of stuff there, and thank you. And we do have a motion on the floor. And I do have to point out, as I said earlier, Caitlin Davis, actually, several of us spoke with several people informally at DOE. I mentioned earlier, Caitlin had specific ideas as to assessments to use. You've spoken to the commissioner.
This language was written by Caitlin and Nate.
The language, not this language.
I just read.
Right. Oh, yeah, but not. They did not write the 1676.
No.
Right.
No.
So a lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about, and everybody else later on. For now, that it's 4:00. Before we ever take the vote on the motion, anything else that anybody wants to add beyond what's been said? And if not,
I'll add one thing, Mike.
Sure.
I'll add one quick thing. I'm probably going to vote no on this if we're looking at the sort of the black and white of the framework of the interim study bill as it exists right now. I think I could certainly be in a very different position come the time we have a committee vote on this. If there's maybe a draft committee report, because I think along with the recommendation or not recommended for future further legislation comes 2 or 3 sentences, right? There's a little mini blurb on this, but if those 2 or 3 sentences, I think, include some of what Rick's talking about, and maybe something that levels the playing field so that some of the larger districts can also maybe see not as profound a change and have resources to be able to do that, consistent with maybe programs that are already in place right now. I think I could take a more favorable position from the committee.
Thank you for that. And after we met the first time on both of the bills we just met on, I did send notes out to everybody and invited, further comment or additions. We'll try to do the same thing here. So whatever the vote outcome here is, we'll do that, and I'll send some notes out, and we can hopefully get not a minority report, but if you think there's some pieces of this for a subsequent LSR next term that could work better than what this is, then I think that would be very useful to have as part of the report to the full. For now, we need an up or down on the motion to support the 1676 incentive grant concept. Motion was made by Representative Litchfield and seconded by Representative Hobson. Representative Lekis? Yay or nay?
Yay on the concept.
Representative Litchfield? You made the
Yes.
motion.
Yay.
Representative Hobson, you made the second. Representative Luno? Representative Ellison? No. Representative Hall?
No.
President Moffett surprisingly votes yay. All right, I'll work on some notes from this and send them out to everyone. And Mr. Chair, since you happen to be here, do you have any sense of when the whole committee will come together? I know there's something.
Well, it most likely won't be till late October.
Okay.
Well, what it is that, we haven't met during June, July, August, or July and August. In September, we're starting to pick some of this up, and we have other studies going on. Committee of the Whole is going to be working on 1680, and we have others. So that we're going to deal them all in one day, rather than separately. So we won't be meeting until we're ready to go with all this. And there are some other sideline type committees and commissions working right now. So it won't be until latter part October. We'll probably do it just before we have to have the report in November.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for showing up.
It looks like that oversight assessment group meets the 27th at 1 o'clock.
27th of 1. Yeah, there was a meeting in the morning, as I recall, that I had. Okay. All righty.
See you tomorrow.
Well, yeah, tomorrow's a big day, isn't it? It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think there'll be some good things. I'm encouraged.
You are?
Yeah.
Ah,
All right.
I don't know if I'm all on board on the money going back out to the regarding the utility or the $100 check to
To
individuals.
me, it's all, I saw the bill come through. I haven't
Yeah,
read it.
yeah,
And I don't know who the sponsors are.
but that didn't show it on the bill.
No, it was one
Didn't
of the
show
rough.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think there's probably going to be some tightening up. And it sounds
There's
like
got, I understand, yeah, because if it was just going to go to the individual user, myself, then I'm gonna go down and buy a 6-pack of beer and have a great
no
time.
kidding. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so that's not gonna
No,
go very
but
far.
it also, if there's income qualification, stuff like that, Henrietta and Dave don't need it.
Well, I'm also concerned that here we had a parking garage we're dealing with,
Yeah,
and we allocated not the dollars we needed for it.
yeah.
And John Graham's big concern was that here we got the cash, and yet we're gonna bond it later on and use our bonding power up when we have cash, which we could be using.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned, this is $60 million worth of stuff here right now. And I'm saying to myself, cheapers, what about the rainy day, or what about some of our capital costs with CTE or with all these other areas, school building aid? I'm looking at the infrastructure right now, and the minimum